Hello everyone, today I'm going to be discussing a lab task practice sheet about MS Excel. Files for this lab task are going to be linked below on a Google Drive folder, so if you want to download it and practice it through there, then you can do that. But yeah, let's get started. So this is the lab task question paper. You work for a company called Hot House Design. You're going to perform some clerical tasks for this company. Using a suitable software package, load the file j8phone.csv. So we're going to load up the file j8phone right here, and it's a .csv file. Now keep this in mind because this is very important, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So this is the .csv file. The first thing you should do if you're given a .csv file is to save this .csv file as an Excel workbook. You go to File up here and then Save As, and then you can choose options from here. But we're going to choose Excel workbook right here, which is .xlsx. The reason we're going to save it as an Excel workbook is because most of the time, whatever you do on a .csv file is not going to be saved, so you don't want to risk it, and so we're gonna always have to switch to an Excel workbook. So the second thing you need to do is to select all of the data as shown and then double click up here. This is going to avoid all the cells lapping on top of each other. As you can see, if we go back right here, this cell is lapping on top of this cell and vice versa. So by doing so and double clicking, it gives room for each cell, and so you can see the text clearly. The second task is, in the department column, use a lookup function. So here it tells you what function to use to show the department name. Now use the decode column for the lookup value and the file j8code.csv for the array. Now we're going to be opening the second file right now, which is the j8 code file. It's also a .csv file, but we're only going to be using this file for this task only, but you can just leave it like that if you would like. Now again, what we're first going to do is we're going to be double clicking up here to give space for this here. So now each cell has space and they're not overlapping. We are going to be doing a lookup function at the department column. So we go back here. This is the department column here. We're going to select the first cell. Now we're going to do a lookup function, and when we do a lookup function, we first look at what our table array is going to be. Here the table array, which is the array right here, is the file j8 code. As you can see, the tables are arranged in two columns, and because these are vertical, we're going to be picking the Vlookup function instead of the Hlookup function. But if they were two rows instead, if the table was two rows, we're going to be picking, in this case, the Hlookup function. Pick the Vlookup function. As you can see, this is the window, and the first thing you see is the lookup value, and it already tells you here what to pick for the lookup value. It says use the decode column for the lookup value. So basically what this task is telling you to do, it wants the meaning of the decode abbreviation right here. So the abbreviation here is MD, and now it wants the name for the MD. So instead of MD, if we go here, MD means managing director right here. So we want managing director to appear right here next to MD. And what does AC mean in the table? AC means accounts, so we want accounts to appear right here next to the AC cell. So that's why we're going to be using a Vlookup function. So we're going to do a Vlookup function right in this cell, and the lookup value is the decode column here. So we're going to pick this cell because it's in the decode column, and this is going to be our lookup value. We're looking in the table array for MD, so we pick this cell. Now we're going to be picking the table array, which, as mentioned in the question again, is this file. So we're going to be selecting all of this, only the table, and it appears in the table array. Now the column index number is how many columns there are in this table. Now we're looking here at a table with 2 columns, so we write 2 here, and then the range lookup is not important right now, so we're just gonna leave it as 0. The question also mentions something important, which is we should include both absolute and relative referencing in the function. Absolute referencing is the one with the dollar symbol, and relative referencing is the one without the dollar symbol. The one with the dollar symbol means basically if we copy this function down to the rest of the column right here, this cell is going to be moving to the next cell. So in the next function, the lookup value is going to be AC. Now sometimes we don't want this to happen. We don't want the cell to move to the next cell. We want this value to always stay the same, which is what the table here is gonna be. We don't want the table to shift to the next cell, which is an empty cell. This can cause a lot of errors to occur, which we don't want. So we want this table to stay the same, so we add dollar symbols here. Now, as you can see, the dollar symbols are already added, which means that the table is not gonna move anymore. But just in case, if the dollar symbols are not added, then select this and click on the F4 key on your keyboard, and the dollar symbols are going to be added. Now, the other type of reference is the relative reference, which is the one that we are going to leave to move. So if we copy down, the lookup value is going to move to AC, and then to PR, and then to SA, and so we're not going to add a dollar symbol here, and we're going to leave it here. So now in this function we have both a relative reference and an absolute reference, and then we click on OK. So as you can see right here, I'm going to select this whole thing again and double click, so now it's visible. As you can see, MD here means managing director. Replicate this function so that the department name for each of the 7 items is shown. So we want this function to be replicated for the whole department column. So we will copy this function down. Now you can do this by double clicking right here on this tiny box, or you could also drag through with this box too. Now as you can see, AC here stands for accounts, PR stands for products, SA stands for sales, etc. And what basically happened is that, as you can see right here in this function, now as you can see in this function, in this cell specifically, the lookup value is the cell B7, which is right next to it. But in the account cell, this lookup value changes to AC, and this is because we did not put any dollar symbols here, and this is also because this is a relative reference. We don't need to add a dollar symbol here. And this means that we have done our first task, and we won't be needing our table anymore, so you can just close it if you want. Okay, now we're done with this. Our third question is enter the following data in the model. So here we have C as 1.1, I as 3, P as 1.6. So basically we already have a table here. We're only going to be inserting the numbers in here. So just insert the numbers here. So 1.1 and 3 and 1.6. We're done with this. Name the cells containing 1.1 cheap, 3 Intel, and 1.6 peak. Now to name cells, so we want to name this cell that contains 1.1 as cheap. There are 2 ways to do this. There's the easy way, where you could just you can see right here the cell name B2. We could just name the cell from up here. We can write cheap, and the cell will be named cheap. As you can see here, the cell is A3 for this one, and once we hover over to 1.1, it becomes cheap because this is its name now. Now, the second way you can do this is to right click on the cell, which we're going to do for the cell with the number 3 right now. And here you go, define name. This window pops up, new name and name. We're going to name the cell from here. We want to name this cell as Intel. So we're going to name it Intel. And now, once we hover over it, as you can see, it also changed its name, which is what we want. And then last but not least, we can name this peak. You can do whichever way you find more comfortable to you. Now we're done with this. The next one is format these 3 cells as 1 decimal place. Numbers to 1 decimal place. Now we're gonna select them all. Now here are the buttons we're looking at right here. It adds decimals and also removes decimals. So this one adds decimals, increases decimals, as you can see. This one decreases decimals. Now it's already like this, right? So here it is, the one with the 1 decimal place. As you can see, if it wants it to 0 decimal places, there you go. If it wants it to 2 decimal places, there. Format cells A2, A3, and A4 so that they're right aligned. This is also easy. So here are the cells they're talking about. And we're going to go to alignment, and here's the right aligned. Use a COUNTIF function that includes both absolute and relative referencing in the cell C7. So here's the cell C7. We're going to insert a function, and it's going to be a COUNTIF function. So this is the COUNTIF. It gives you both a range and a criteria. Now, basically what this function does is it counts the number of cells that you want with a certain criteria. We want it to count the numbers of MD entries in the D code column. Do not count any entries in rows 1 to 13. Okay, so the range is the one in the decode column. There are 2 decode columns here, but it says clearly do not count the ones in the rows 1 to 13, so we're not going to be counting them, and we're going to be picking the second column here. Okay, now what is our criteria? We want to count the number of MD entries, so we're going to click here on the decode column for MD entries, and basically what this function does is it goes through all of this decode column and searches for how many entries has MD in it, or how many cells has MD, and then counts how many cells has MD and inserts it here in the C7 cell. Now it also says we want absolute and relative referencing here. Now, as we copy down the function, we want this cell to change. We want it to change to AC to count the number of AC cells, and BR cells. So this cell is going to change. So we're going to leave the criteria as a relative referencing. But our column is not going to change. So we're going to use this as an absolute referencing for our function. So what you're going to do is you're going to select the range here and press the key F4, which adds the dollar symbols. And again, what this does is once you copy down this function, this column is not going to change, and we don't want it to change. Okay, so we're gonna go to OK, and now it counts the number of MD entries in this column. Now it says here replicate this function in the cells C8 to C13 to count the number of cell calls from the other departments. So if we copy now down here, now it counts the number of AC cells and BR cells in the decode column down here. Our next question is, use a function that includes both absolute and relative referencing in cell D7 to calculate the sum of the duration column if the decode column contains MD. So here it doesn't tell you exactly what kind of function you need to add in the cell D7, but what it does tell you is it is a sum function. You calculate the sum of the duration column. So basically what a sum function is if you select multiple cells and put a sum function in one of them, it will add those cells together. So we're gonna add the cells in the duration column if the decode column contains MD. So here it has a rule. So you only add if the D column contains MD. So here it basically tells you that the function you need to use is a SUMIF function. So we're going to go to the cell D7, which is right under the total duration. We're going to add a function here, and it's going to be a SUMIF function. Now, what it tells you, you're going to count the duration here if the decode column contains MD. So our range is basically where the criteria is. So the criteria lies in the decode column. So we're going to select the decode column here, right? And our criteria is MD. So basically what we're telling the computer right now is in the range here, the decode range, if the decode range contains MD, which is right here, we're gonna add the cells next to it in the duration. So we're only gonna add the durations that contain MD next to it. So the sum range is where we're gonna add, which is the duration column. So we're gonna select the whole duration column here. And there you go. Now, we also need to include absolute and relative referencing. Now, again, we need the absolute referencing where we don't want these numbers to change. We don't want the range to change in the D column. We want it to stay the same. So we're going to select the range, and we're going to press the key F4, and there you go. You have the dollar symbol. It won't change if you copy down the function. The same thing here for the sum range. We're going to add an F4 here. And there you go, it won't change. Now here is going to be our relative referencing, or the one that will change. So for example, if I copy this down, we want the criteria here to change to AC. So next time it's counting, it's going to look here and say, oh, there's an AC here, so I'm going to count the duration for this cell and add it to this cell because it also has AC. So the decode will change. We're going to leave it as a relative reference without any dollar symbols, and we're going to click on OK, and as you can see, it added the cells which contains MD next to it. And right here it says do not include row 1 to 13, which we did not include these rows, this row right here, so we did not add this row to it, so that's good. And we also need to replicate this function to cells D8 to D13 to sum the total duration for each decode. So we're going to drag this down, and now it's copied to the other cell. Moving on to the next question. In the units column, which is the cell E16, use an if function to calculate the units used. Okay, so this is where we're talking about. This cell E16 is the one we're talking about in the units column. Now, if the code is C, then we multiply the named cell cheap by the duration. If it's I, then we're going to be multiplying the cell intel with the duration. If the code is P, then we're going to be multiplying the cell peak with the duration. If the code does not equal to any of these, if none of these are true, then the unit should be 0. Okay, so we're gonna add an if function. It definitely tells you that you should add an if function. We're gonna type here if, and we're gonna pick an if function. Now, here's the if function window. So what we need to do is a logical test. We're going to be testing this right here, the code column. Now, here we pick this cell because it's right next to it. Now, what basically they're trying to explain is if this column equals to C, so if this column contains C, then we're going to be multiplying this rate cell, which is called cheap, with the duration here. And then the multiplication answer is going to be here in the unit cell. Now, if it's not, then it's gonna do another logical test for if it's I. If it is I, we're gonna multiply the Intel cell with the duration, and the answer is gonna be here. If it's not I either, and it's P, then it's gonna be multiplying this cell, which is called peak, with the duration, and the answer is gonna be here. If this cell does not have any of these letters, if it does not contain C or I or P, then the unit should be 0. So this is the first logical test, which is if this cell equals to C. So what you're gonna do first of all is we're gonna pick this cell, which is right next to the cell we're working with, and we're gonna put an equal sign. Now if this cell equals to, we're gonna put 2 quotation marks because we're gonna put text in here. If it equals to C, this is the first logical test. If this is true, if it is equal to C, then we're going to be multiplying this cell which is the cheap cell. We're going to be multiplying the cheap cell. The multiply symbol is the star symbol, which is shift 8, with this duration cell right here. Now if it is false, we're going to add another function, another if function. So we go up here and we click again. It does a new if function. So this is if this cell is not equal to C. So we're going to do another logical test. What if it's equal to I? So we're going to click on the same cell and do an equal sign and 2 quotation marks. And we're going to write in here capital I. So if this cell equals to I, if it is true, we're going to be multiplying this cell, which is called the Intel cell, with the duration. So again, we're going to be multiplying the Intel cell with the star symbol, then the duration. If again it's false, we're going to do another logical test. So we're going to add another if function. So now we're going to try if it's equal to P. So we're going to click on the cell and then equals to and 2 quotation marks. So if it is equal to P, we're going to write P in there. So if this cell equals to P, if it is true, we're going to multiply the rate cell peak with the duration with the star symbol. Now again, if it is false, if none of these meets, if this cell does not meet the expectation of any of these, then the value is going to be 0. Oh, so basically again what it does is it searches this code right here and sees if it's equal to C. If it's equal to C, it multiplies the rate with the duration. If it's equal to I, it multiplies the rate with the duration. If it is equal to P, it's going to multiply this rate with the duration. If the cell does not equal to C or I or P, then the value is going to be 0. Now we're going to copy down this function. I just double clicked right here and there you go. It multiplied to the whole thing. Format all the cells in rows 1, 6, and 15 to be center aligned. Okay, 1, 6, and 15. So we're gonna select 1, we're gonna click on 1, then hold our control button and then click on 6, and then while still holding the control button also click on 15. Now those rows are selected. Now we need them to be center aligned, so we'll go to the alignment up here and click on center. Now all of them are center aligned. Next one is format all the cells in rows 1, 6, and 15 so that they're bold. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to click on 1 and then hold the control key and click on 6, and then while still holding click on 15. Then we're going to go to the fonts here and you're going to find the bold button. Now they're bold. So that's it for this video. Next video I'm going to be discussing the next tasks, which are tasks 12 to 20, which are heavily related to printing. And see you next time.